Okay, so you were talking about your 3-week Pullman.
So we went on that trip, and this is a little bit funky, but on that trip we met a woman and her daughter, and her daughter was about my age, and I recall her as being a little bit pudgy, and I was 12 years old, and it's my first recollection of stirring, sexually stirring. But I wasn't stirring over the daughter.
I was the mom.
I was stirring. I was stirring over the mom.
Yeah.
And I remember it's my first recollection of that. First recollection of that. Anyway, and I don't know. We've got pictures of that somewhere along the way. A bunch of black and white pictures.
Little
I don't know
books,
exactly
little
where
books.
they're. Yeah, little books. In any case, the trip was great. I mean, New York City, saw War of the Worlds on Times Square in New York City.
Wow.
Stayed at the Astor Hotel. Went to all the sites in Washington, D.C. And then spent time in near Springfield with my dad's close friend, Lou Ayres. And Lou Ayres was an ophthalmologist or an optometrist or some kind of eye doctor. I don't know which kind of eye doctor. And we stayed at his house, which is very typical of what we saw when we were back there just a few years ago. And that was a house that stood alone, with no houses right next to it, with no fences or anything like that. And there was woods nearby, and I walked through those, and they were very different than the woods out here because they were woods that would always drop their trees. They weren't alpine.
Deciduous.
It was deciduous place. But I remember the beauty of the place. And I remember driving, or Lou Ayres drove us someplace. And I don't know. So we stayed with them. Getting back to Huntington Park and that farmhouse, one of the cool things about that farmhouse was that 5 houses away was Salt Lake Avenue. And when it rained, Salt Lake Avenue was the spot where all the streets that went into, incidentally, all the streets, I'm going to name them, Broadway, Hill, Olive, Grand, Flower, Live Oak, I think it was. All those streets drained into Salt Lake Avenue. And all those streets are the same streets in the same order of downtown Los Angeles. There's Hill, there's Flower, there's Olive. All those streets are in the same order in downtown Los Angeles. There was a streetcar that went from State Street up Florence Avenue and then up Pacific Avenue and all the way to Los Angeles. It was called the J car, and it was an electric streetcar. And what I remember about that is the main time we used that was to go shopping at Christmas time at Robinson's, I think it was Robinson's, up in Los Angeles, and we would ride the streetcar. And at Christmas time, all the windows would be decorated, and it was a big deal to go up there and see the decorations and the windows of Robinson's. And there was a restaurant up there called Renee and Jean's. And Renee and Jean's was a sort of a formal, kind of narrow restaurant. And they had, I think they had French onion soup was their specialty. And I would eat French onion soup at Renee and Jean's. And I think it coincided with Christmas and the J car and the Christmas decorations. The other place up there was Sears. That Sears store is there to this very day. You can see it from the 5 freeway as you go home. You'll look off to the left and you'll see Sears. Well, in those days, that was the Sears for Southern California. And it was not a flat building. It was a multi-story building. And to go into the front door of that store, you had to walk upstairs. And the second you walked through those stairs, what you did was you smelled nuts. They would have roasting nuts in the right as you walked in the building. I guess that was inviting, and I guess they sold nuts because people like the idea of warm, hot nuts.
Yeah.
And we'd go shopping at Sears, and it has not, that building has not changed in 80 years. It has not changed. It's the same building that was there 80 years ago.
I wonder what's in it now.
And Sears was the Costco, was the Costco of its time. There would be a Sears catalog that would come out every single year, and it would be as thick as a telephone book, and it would have page after page after page of the smallest thing you could think of to a kit house that you could buy and have delivered to your lot, and everything in between. In any case, it was kind of neat to look at the underwear section. The women would have their underwear on. And as a youngster, it was nice to look at women in their underwear. Anyway, what else? I don't know. And I guess then some people put them in the outhouses too. I don't know. We never had an outhouse. But in those days, when I was probably very, very young, you only took a bath once a week. And it was Saturday. The cliche about splish splash, I was taking a bath on a Saturday night, that was culturally what you did. Now I don't know why people didn't bathe more than they did in those days, but that's what I remember. And what I remember is that you'd take a bath every Saturday night, whether you needed one or not. And my mom gave it to me. But let me get back to Salt Lake. So all these roads dump into this Salt Lake Avenue, and when it rained, there would be water from curb to curb. Now on the other side of Salt Lake was a railroad track. And for years and years and years, later years, freight trains would roll down those tracks. But I'm telling you, you could hear the train coming. And when you're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, if there's a train coming, you're gonna go look at it. I would run, whatever I was doing stopped, and I would go run and see that train going down the track. In fact, I distinctly remember, and I'll swear to you, that at one point, and I don't think it lasted very long, but there were trains that were not just freight trains, they were passenger trains, and they were full of soldiers, I guess, coming home or going someplace. I don't know where they were going, but they would, you could see them you could see them in the railroad cars as they went along, and that was pretty cool. I liked that a lot. It's at one point, I remember going up on that raised track and hiking along the track, and there'd be liquor bottles that were kind of flat, and at least I remember as liquor bottles. Maybe they were other kind, I don't know. I remember one time, and what I'd love to do is to take and throw them against the metal track and watch them explode. That was fun. Well, one time I threw one, and it missed the track and went out and hit the hood of a moving car. And I don't know whether the guy stopped or not, but I guess thankfully I don't think he thought I was throwing it at him. But boy, I tell you, I'm not sure I peed my pants, but I probably thought about it, because throwing that bottle and hitting that car was not a good idea. But in those days, every Sunday, there were a couple of things that happened. One of them was around 1:30, something like that. We would sit down to Sunday dinner, and Sunday dinner was in the afternoon. And my mom was a damn good cook. And the quintessential Sunday dinner was one or two things. Now, I'm sure there were other things, but the two things I remember was stewed chicken with homemade biscuits and lemon pie. And another Sunday dinner would be brisket with carrots and mashed potatoes and gravy and lemon pie. Those were two often enjoyed meals on Sunday, and Mom would cook those. And
Still, when I was a kid, I remember brisket very well.
Brisket's a good cut of meat if you no, it's not saute, it's braise. A braised brisket can be very, very good, or a smoked brisket can be very, very good. It's a cheap cut of meat, but if you cook it right, it's very, very good. But in those days, the first television, well, here's a cool thing. Next to that house was a vacant lot. My dad built a garage on that lot before the house was built. And next to that was where Norm Kokritz lived. Norm Kokritz was a couple of years younger than I was. And he lived in there, and he had a little brother named Terry, and he was a good friend of mine. Next to him were the Corrales, and it was a Mexican family. And the Mexican family, I'm going to think, had Jimmy Corrala, Gilbert Corrala, Louis Corrala, and then Mom and Dad. Now, whether they had anything more than that, I don't know, but I remember those 5 names. But what I want you to know about that is they had the first television on the street. And here's how it worked. God. The screen was about like this. And the screen was not something you looked at. It was not something you looked at. The screen was on a flat thing like this, so that the screen, you'd have to be on the roof looking down at the screen, because the screen was like this.
You looked down into it.
You did not, because there was a mirror right here. So there was a screen and a mirror. So you saw, I guess you saw the reverse because it was a reflection. But that little bitty screen, and the damn television was way bigger than certainly with today's eyes, it was stupid. But in those days, I guess there were no transistors. It was all vacuum tubes and et cetera, et cetera. But they had the first television. Now next to him was, Jimmy was younger than me. And we hung out together. We did all kinds of stuff. But at one point, we were on the outs or something, and Jimmy called my dad a drunk. And boy, I was after him. I was after him because he called my dad a drunk. Mm-hmm. Now my dad was drunk, but I didn't want. I didn't need to hear it from him. Yeah. I did not need to hear it from him. So I remember chasing his ass. I'm not sure. I don't think I caught him, but I was. If I had I'd have probably then done something that I'd have gotten in trouble for. But next to him was Ronnie McCarthy, and Ronnie McCarthy was 2 years older than I was. So, and then there was another house next to that where there might have been a girl, and then next to that was Gary. And Gary lived in a house, and that house had a vacant lot right next to it. And so, and I think Gary was older. I don't know Gary's last name. But I do remember that when we got a little bit older, we would go and we would sit in trees together. There was trees, and we took great pride in climbing trees. We took great pride in climbing over fences. We took great pride in climbing over the fence, crawling behind the bushes, and crawling over another fence, and nobody saw us because we were good climbers. Well, there was a tree in the back of Gary's property. Gary, whatever his name was. God, I can't remember his name. But we would go to that tree, and I think Ronnie and Gary would smoke, and I was the lookout. They would smoke in the tree, and I didn't smoke because I was a very good person, as everyone knows. Maybe not, but I was the lookout, and we did that. And then after that, I remember going to there were 3 theaters in town. There was the Warner's Theater. There were 4 theaters. There was the Lyric, there was the Warner's, there was the California, and there was the Park. And I can remember you'd smoke in the balcony. And I remember going to the balcony as probably a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid with Ronnie and Gary, and they'd light up in the balcony, and I lit up too. And I feel like one of the great things that ever happened to me was when I lit up the movie, it all started moving like this.
Oh yeah.
It was the nicotine or the smoke or the whatever caused this unsteadiness on that screen. Now, probably not to the extent that I'm showing you right here, but I didn't like it. And boy, was I ever lucky not to like that.
Yeah.
Because smoking cigarettes is good for nothing. And in those days, smoking was really common, extremely common with women and men and everybody. Smoking was something you did. Lucky Strikes was a WW2 staple. In fact, they had what they called the Lucky Strike Hit Parade, and all that sort of thing. So that was my brush with smoking. So back to Olive Street and the farmhouse. We'd be sitting at the table and we'd be having Sunday dinner. And sitting at the table would be my brother's best friend, Ray Carmichael, who later became the driver of the gasoline truck up in Julian. And he and Norm and my sister, Helen, were boyfriend and girlfriend. And they'd be sitting and they'd take a bite of whatever and take a bite and they'd look at each other and then they go, they take a bite of something and they go, they couldn't get enough of each other.
Aww.
Now, their marriage didn't last. And he later married a younger gal, Peggy Brown. And I think they had children. But then my sister Helen stayed in the house that they had at first in Chula Vista on what was the name of the street? I can't remember the name of the street. You'd turn off on L Street, and I can't remember the name of their street, but it was a very simple house. And she lived to it, I think, in it to the day she died.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been from the 40s through the early 2000s, I think. And in that house, she was married to Johnny, and Johnny Hank was his name. They had Bruce Hank and Judy Hank, their two children. But he was a nervous guy, and he was a wannabe cop. But he couldn't ever become a cop for whatever reason, I don't know. But he then became a security guard at the what's the name of the hotel in Coronado, in the Coronado Hotel down in San Diego. He became that there. But the story that I remember two stories about him. At one point, he was going to be a truck driver, and he bought a truck, and he owned that truck, and he was kind of an independent contractor, I think. And he'd come to our house and he'd park his truck out front. And then he became a security guard. But at the end of his life, I don't know how much of this went on, but the thing that sticks in my mind is that he would sit in a chair and he would have a hassock or stool sitting next to it, and on that he would have a loaded gun on the stool, because the Mexicans were coming across the border and you needed to be ready.
Wow.
You needed to be ready.
Wow.
So that was sort of his mentality. He could not have been a lot of fun to have as a father or husband. I don't know, maybe he was. Who am I to say? But that's I guess a negative story I'd tell you about Johnny. Yeah. So let's go back to Julian. When I became a teenager, when I got my license, I was 16 years old. I started working at 17 with I'm going to go back to Los Angeles, with Barks Bottling Company. My dad was the accountant for Barks Bottling Company. Sidney Piker owned Barks Bottling Company. He was a Jewish guy, and Barks Bottling Company. Barks is a southern soda pop. You can still buy it to this day. I think Coca-Cola owns it. But I worked at the bottling plant. I was on the line. I would take bottles off the line and put them in cases, put them in cases, put them in cases. And they wanted me to drive a truck for them. Now, this is when I was probably 17 or 18 years old. So I took the test, and I took the driving test, and I got a class, whatever it was, a license. And I think I drove a truck for them a couple of times. I don't remember doing it very much, but I did do it just a little bit. I'm surprised that they allowed a young kid like me to do that, but they did. And I would work there, and Roy was the foreman. He was on the line, and these clean bottles would come in front of him, and he would look at the bottles because they came from the washer, and his job was to be sure that those bottles were clean before they went into the fill and the shake, and then to me to put in the cases. But he would kind of go to sleep sometimes, and he had false teeth. Roy had false teeth. And he would take his pocket knife that he would clean the scum off of the scum off the line, I guess out of boredom, I don't know, or maybe he just wanted it clean, I'm not sure. And then he'd take his false teeth out, and if there was a spot that was kind of hurting, Roy would scrape his false teeth and then stick them back in. So I remember that. And in that place there was also rats. There was rats, and these were industrial rats. These were rats this is what I remember. I'm probably exaggerating, but I swear they were this long, and they had a tail that long also. And every once in a while, Roy would find a rat, and he would take a stick, and he'd kill the damn rat, and then he'd pick it up by the tail, and he'd walk around with it. Yeah, Roy. And he was old. And of course, I don't know, but it was kind of fun. But then I also worked for Mother's Cookies, and I would that was when I was in high school, I think. And when I worked for Mother's Cookies, there would be a big semi that would come in full of Mother's Cookies. To this day, there's Mother's Cookies, and there would be places on the floor which would be orders for various locations, drops, so to speak. And I think I drove a cookie truck too. I might be wrong about that. I may be conflating that with something else. But I know for a fact I was part of the process of unloading those cookies and making sure that they were wherever they needed to be. But that's how I made extra money. And
what did you do with your money?
Well, I remember two things about money. First of all, I remember always working it was Mother's Cookies. It was it was Pacific Clay Pipe in Norwalk, California factory, and I was going to Whittier College at that time. And when I worked at the PCP, my job was to stack manufactured pipe fittings, clay pipe fittings on pallets, getting them ready to do whatever. But the thing I remember about being there was, I remember two things. First of all, I used a lot of oil in the process, and I would get oil all over me. Well, finally, I got oil to the place that I broke out, and I was just in misery, itching because of all the oil. And I remember having to go to the doctor, and I don't know what they did, but they fixed it, I guess.
Oil as in like motor oil? Or?
No, oil in you do stuff to the pipe, and if you had oil, you could do it to the pipe, but you wouldn't distort the pipe. That's kind of how I remember it. But there were a bunch of Mexican guys that would drive the forklifts and all that kind of stuff around. And of course, I guess, and I think maybe there were more than one of us. I mean, I don't know. But we were younger than the Mexican guys, and they would make fun of us. And the way they'd make fun of us was, when I was doing what I was ever doing, one of the Mexican guys would come up and he would take a wire and with a little hook on it, And at the end of that wire, he'd put a piece of cloth, and he'd hang it on the belt, on the loop in the back of my Levi's. Now, I couldn't feel it. And then another guy would come up to me, and he'd look at me, and he'd say, "Baka? You? Baka? Baka?" And it was because, they were making fun of me. And I it never made, if it made me angry, I've forgotten it. It didn't. I kind of went along with it because that seemed like the best way to handle it, I guess. I don't know. But, you? Baka?
So you put like a tail on you.
It had a tail, so I must be a cow. That was a Pacific clay pipe, Mother's Cookies, Pacific clay pipe. Oh, before that, I was a box boy at Safeway. I boxed groceries, and that's when I must have been really young then, because I'd walk down from my grandmother's place, I'd walk down the alley, and there was Safeway, and I was somehow $5 sticks in my mind. I think I got a $5 tip from somebody. I don't know, taking groceries to their car. That doesn't seem right, because $5 would have been a lot of money in those days. I'm probably wrong about that, but that's what I'm making up in my head right now. So Safeway, Pacific Clay Pipe. I worked in the bookstore at Whittier College. Played basketball. I had $125 a semester for playing basketball, and I don't know how much we made an hour for.
You got paid $125 to play basketball.
No, it went against. It went.
You got a
tuition.
discount. Scholarship.
It applied to my tuition. Yeah. And then I worked in the bookstore, and I don't know what I made per hour, but it was whatever I made an hour, and all the candy I could steal from the counter next to the register. And the Cliffs, Bob Clift and his wife, I don't know who, but they had been at Whittier College forever. Now, Whittier College is a cool place. I remember a couple of things about Whittier College. First of all, I went there because at Huntington Park High School, I was student body president. I was president of the service clubs in sophomore, junior, senior year. I was key club president. I was captain of the basketball team. I was varsity basketball. I was varsity track. I was Mr. Everything. But I was Mr. Everything because I was a mid-year class, which turned out to be very fortunate. They didn't have many choices. There was only 90 of us in the mid-year class that graduated in February. Now the June class had 400 people in it. Now if I had been in a class
So were you mid-year, all from kindergarten on? How did you end up in a mid-year class?
I don't know what to say.
Okay.
I don't know what to say.
Why did they have mid-year classes?
I guess there were double graduations from Gage Junior High School, and I guess I hadn't thought of that. But when I went there, I graduated mid-year, and I went to Whittier College mid-year, and I went to Whittier College because Miss Reinman, the Spanish teacher, fat lady, said, "You'd be good at Whittier College." Yeah, I guess that sounds good to me. and so I went to Whittier College. And there was a black guy, I can't remember his name, but he kind of took me under his wing. And the thing that strikes me about Whittier College is this. I had no idea that there was a difference between public school and a private school. I was going to a private school, a small private school of 1,500 people. Yeah. I could have gone to UCLA or USC or I don't know where I could have gone to those places, but if I had gone to those places, I would have been part of several tens of thousands of kids at a school, and I was so fortunate to go to Whittier College, because at Whittier College, again, I was AMS president, I was on the basketball team, I was president of the fraternity, I don't know. Oh, and I was a dorm daddy. And dorm daddy was really cool because I was at Wanberg and I was at Earlham and I was at the hospital, and I got all my food and all my lodging for nothing by simply living in the dorm and being essentially the eyes and ears of the administration. If the crap went on, I was the narc. I guess. I mean, I don't think I did much of anything, but I know for a fact that I got room and board for 4 years because I was that. The long and the short of that is, and I always knew that I was going to go into education. I don't know why. Probably because school was always a place that I liked and felt, I don't know, I felt comfortable in schools. So I knew I was going to be a teacher, and I knew I was going to be a principal. I saw myself as a leader. In any case, I went through Whittier College and played basketball. Met your mom. She was the sweetheart of the Lancer guys that I was president of. She was the homecoming queen. She was the head song leader. She was secretary of the student body with Stan Sanders, the president of the student body, my roommate, drafted by the Chicago Bears as a split end because he could run 9 something in the 100-yard dash and had great hands and was big. Later became an attorney, and as he lives in Beverly Hills now and has done. He ran for mayor of Los Angeles, and he was one of the top 2 or 3 candidates running for mayor at the time. I think maybe Bradley. It was at the time that Bradley ran. Maybe it was after him. I forget the little white guy that was. I forget that guy's name, but he might have run against him. I don't know. And he did not win, but he was connected in a lot of ways. He became a Rhodes Scholar and went to Magdalen College in Oxford. So he went from Whittier to Oxford to Yale to Beverly Hills to be a sports lawyer. He was lawyer for a lot of Laker players back in the day. And I don't know what day that was, but it had to be in the 70s when whatever the Lakers were at the time. And we've kind of reconnected over time, and I can't get your mother to get the house looking nice enough to invite Stan. Is it true? That's not true. Look, you're mad at me.
No.
Is it true?